Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here on the map Lightsigger Ford for a bit of Greenskin against High Elf gameplay. And so this time around I did just decide to build a somewhat competitive army with Warthag at the heart of it. Not really going for any gimmicks here, just simply trying out a slightly different combination of units. Not investing quite as heavily into the cavalry, trying out the nasty skulkers, and just trying to do a little bit of, I guess, more infantry heavy composition here. So for my lord, as mentioned before, I did bring Warthag. Warthag is actually pretty powerful. His melee stats are not the best; they're decent. He does, of course, have Frenzy like all the other Savage Orcs, which does give him some decent survivability. He also does have a little charm that gives an AoE 11% physical resist, and that affects all of his allies, which is really useful. It used to be a little weaker because I do believe it only triggered when he was out of melee, which meant you couldn't use him in fighting, but now it triggers no matter what. And definitely very, very useful. A little buff for all of his troops if he's in the midst of the fight. He also does have the Warthag's Revenge, which is a 50% miscast chance. Very good against, on a map-wide basis. That's very good against high elves because you can whittle down their casters a little bit this way, since they definitely tend to rely on spells. Power of the Wall, of course, gives you better power recharge rate. Bonewood Staff is a great buff to melee attack and charge bonus. That happens when he's casting a spell. And then he does, of course, have Squigly Beast, which improves his power recharge rate and power reserves. So that means that in this game I should definitely have very, very solid amounts of magic to go off of. I did also bring Fists of Gork, which is a nice little single target buff. Basically the reverse of the Wither of the Enfeebling Foe for Lore of Shadows. This is basically the inverse of that. Here we go, which is a great AoE 44 melee attack buff, basically just Wah. The Foot of Gork, which is, of course, one of the great explosion damage spells. That can definitely annihilate big units very, very quickly, or big blobs very, very quickly. The Get Back here, which is a slight leadership buff, and then Effigy of the Git, which is a nice little snare that can freeze enemies in place for 13 seconds while damaging them with a Spirit Leech sort of effect. Then we do have a Night Goblin Shaman, who of course does have Itchy Nuisance, Sneaky Stabbin', and the Wand of Jet, simply to give me more power reserves, as well as just to give me those nifty little debuffs. I also did bring Sneaky Stealing just to try to cripple my opponent's spellcasting a little further. Alongside that, we also do have a Goblin Big Boss over here on the flank, completely stripped down, but on a spider, so as to provide poison support for the Broken Tusks mob, who is screening my flank against large. On the other flank, we do have a simple unit of Orc Boar Boy Big Guns, once again deployed to counteract enemy large. Now, Boar Boy Big Guns are main perk against enemy cavalry, simply they have huge HP pool and hit pretty hard, and they have armor piercing. But otherwise, their melee stats are honestly somewhat lackluster. Their armor's pretty terrible. They're definitely not the best of cavalry units, but they're cheap and efficient at what they do. My front line is composed entirely of Savage Orcs. These guys are very quick. They can get into the fight fast. They can flank. They can get into the enemy backlines if they have archers. And obviously, if your opponent does have archers, I would want to pull them back behind the Black Orcs. But nonetheless, these guys can definitely do quite a bit of work, and they can tear through a lot of the high elf infantry, or the lower end high elf infantry, in a fairly efficient manner, just because they have huge HP pools once again. Black Orcs in the second line, of course, these guys are monstrous. They will tear through just about anything shy of Sword Masters and Phoenix Guard. Great weapon strength, decent melee attack, decent melee defense, and monstrous armor at 110 plus 8,000, over 8,000 HP. So these guys, I do believe, have the highest HP per model of any unit in the game. Finally, in the back line, we do have a unit of Nasty Skulkers covering for a unit of Night Goblin Archers, as well as the Rusty Arrows, giving me both armor sundering as well as poison damage. This is very useful against units such as the White Lions of Krace, who would otherwise definitely give the Savage Orcs some huge problems. For my opponent, he definitely went with a bit of an interesting composition. He does have, I do believe, Tyrion hidden here in the back, coming in with the Stand Your Ground, as well as a Sunfang, though interestingly no Heart of Averlorn, so not bothering with the heals, perhaps having faith in his Lore of High Magic and Apotheosis. My opponent also does have 2 units of Silver Helms hidden here in the trees, as well as 2 further units of Silver Helms over on the flank, and a unit of Illyrian Reaver Archers, who are already peppering away at Warthag. So definitely a very cavalry heavy build, a very sort of micro-intensive build, with only really his front line being there to hold, with a mix of White Lines of Krace as well as Spearmen. These guys will, while definitely able to kind of slow down the Savage Orcs, are not really going to have a stand a chance against the Black Orcs, and will probably buckle rather quickly. He does, as mentioned before, have the Mage of High Magic over here on a horse with the Starwood Staff, as well as the Book of Hoeth for power reserves, Tempest, which is a great little vortex snare spell, and then Apotheosis for the heal. So definitely a very potent support caster there, and definitely a very micro-intensive army that could potentially cycle charge my rear line into Oblivion. I'm definitely going to be relying on these nasty skulkers to try to shut down any attempts to get on top of my Night Goblin archers, so we'll definitely see how things work out as things kick off. Over here, my Orc Board with big guns are simply there as a bit of speed mode. They do spot Tyrion, and will engage on him shortly. Over here you can see my Savage Orcs do not quite get their charge off. You can see they do get their charge off over here on the white lines of Krace, and are actually trading very effectively. They've already whittled down the white lines a whole bunch, and will do rather well as long as their frenzy sticks around. Over here the Black Orcs do plow into the white lines of Krace. I did try to get the Black Orcs into the front, but it didn't quite work out everywhere. And you can see they're chopping through these white lines rather quickly. Over here the Savage Orcs do go for the flank, and back in the back, my opponent unfortunately did not pay enough attention, tried to get his Illyrian archers into my rear, and gets snared by nasty skulkers who hit both with a smoke bomb, and you can see these guys just get completely annihilated by the Broken Tusk Mob, as well as Wurtzag and the Big Goblin Big Boss, plus all the archery fire just coming down on them. Over here you can see the Savage Orcs as well as the Black Orcs are collapsing on the white lines, tearing them to shreds. A Sunfang does go down, really beating up on these Orc Poor Boy big guns. It definitely seems that my opponent was struggling a little bit to keep up with all the demand of all the micro that he needed. And so while Tyrion definitely smushes these Orc Board Boy big guns over on the flank here, in the meantime the white lines of Krace are getting collapsed just about everywhere, and his front line is definitely not doing the hottest. Sneaky Stabbing does go down on these Black Orcs, and as well as Itchy Nuisance on these white lines of Krace, crippling their damage output. And in the meantime, the back line has been secured, with my opponent's Illyrian Reaver archers being shattered and driven off the field in defeat. And this will open up the opportunity for my Rusty Arrows to open fire. You can see I do root the Silver Helms in place with an effigy of the Git, and then do try to charge the nasty Skulkers into the Silver Helms just to buy time for my archers. With the help of Wurtzag, these guys can definitely bring the Silver Helms down a bit. Wurtzag does have a pretty monstrous charge bonus at 86, and it does hit like a truck. He does have armor-piercing damage and okay weapon strength. 352 with AP. Over here you can see I do cast a Foot of Gork, absolutely annihilating these spearmen and really beating the snot out of these white lines of Krace, which will allow the Black Orcs, who did get clipped by it a little bit, to win this fight and then help support the heart of my army over here. Wurtzag is definitely getting pressured by Tyrion, who will kill Wurtzag very quickly with his terrible melee defense, but as long as I can kind of back off and survive, I should be okay. Over here, the front line is definitely kind of collapsed. You can see I have used Night Goblin Shaman, put him into the fight. And the reason for this is actually the Night Goblin Shaman, if he lands hits, he does apply poison, so it's not a terrible debuff. And the Black Orcs, as you can see, are absolutely shredding through the white lines of Krace really, really quickly. My opponent's line is definitely kind of crumpling. He does get into the cookie jar in the back here, because I simply don't have enough cavalry to cover everything. But nonetheless, between smoke bombs, between Wurtzag's spells, and between the heavy cavalry, a cavalry contingent is definitely getting mopped up. So far, they haven't achieved very much. They've routed off a few nasty Skulkers, routed off a few Savage Orcs, and the Night Goblin Archers, but they just haven't been able to really break the back of my army, which is this mob of Savage Orcs, Black Orcs, and heavy cav. You can see the debuffs going down. Itchy Nuisance just bring these guys very, very low. I'm unable to really land hits, and the Broken Tusk Mob is just shredding the poor Silver Helms very, very quickly. But Silver Helms don't have AP, and with reduced weapon strength, thanks to Itchy Nuisance, they're just really not able to lay the smackdown on the Broken Tusk Mob, even as my opponent's infantry contingent is buckling. Over here, the Spearmen are shattered, and unfortunately I leave the Savage Orcs to keep pursuing. I also haven't actually realized my opponent has a Mage of High Magic, because obviously he hasn't been able to cast Tempest, and Apotheosis is easy to miss in the midst of a fight. Unfortunately for my opponent, though, his infantry contingent is basically crippled. Over here, the Orc Board big guns do plow into the Silver Helms. They will obviously lose this fight, because as we discussed before, they have terrible armor and pretty terrible survivability. And they just get overwhelmed, and you can see the Silver Helms just running amok, and they're probably going to bring this guy low. Maybe not. Maybe this lone boar boy will ride away, or these two lone boar boys. Over in the pits, you can see the Goblin Big Boss poisoning and debuffing the Silver Helms. Of course, that's another source of debuffs with the poison. That really only leaves Tyrion, as well as these Silver Helms, because the rest of my opponent's force is basically collapsed. His infantry is on the route. Unfortunately, my Night Goblin Shaman did break, and I actually think it just broke in melee. I don't really think my opponent did very much to him. Over here, Tyrion, of course, does not have any heals. He does not have the Heart of Avalorn. I actually didn't notice this in the middle of the game, but he is simply being dragged into the muck. Actually, never mind, that's not Tyrion. I actually don't realize where Tyrion is. Oh yeah, he's over here. But Tyrion does not have the Heart of Avalorn. He has popped Stand Your Ground, but it's not supporting, of course, these Silver Helms. And though he's going to try to plow into the back here and get some disruption, he's simply not going to do very much before I hit him with an effigy of the Git and start surrounding him with my Savage Orcs. And yeah, just whittling him down. Over here, I do get a Git back here just to keep my leadership high, keep that frenzy up on the Savage Orcs. And here we go on the Savage Orcs to make sure they hit. And they're just melting here. And you can see Tyrion's definitely not able to do very much. He does get an Apotheosis, but with my troops having immunity to psychology or being rather high in morale, they're not really going to break here. They're going to be able to strip Tyrion down rather effectively. At this point, you can see my opponent's front line is definitely, or my opponent's army is essentially annihilated. He does have some white lines over here on the flank. He does have a few kind of smidgens of cavalry here, troops routing off here and there. So most of these guys are shattered at this point, and with only a handful of troops left, he doesn't make a last desperate attempt to utilize the Sunfang, but then it is game over as Tyrion is slain. So, definitely I think this is a pretty decent build against the High Elves. You do have some hard counters to their heavy cav, to their nasty flyers, in the shape of the Orc Big Guns, in the shape of the Poison from the Big Boss, the Debos from Wurzag, and the Night Gobbo Shaman. Of course, Savage Orcs can shred through any cheap units, so in this situation they didn't do too well. They just couldn't deal with the White Lines of Krace in a 1-to-1, and they didn't really have ideal targets here. Generally, you want to use them as a bit of a flanking / support unit, and I definitely got mistimed their attack with the Black Orcs, and definitely made some mistakes there. Nasty Skulkers are just brutal. They got the Lyrian Reavers, Archers wiped off the map. Definitely a bit of mismicro, and I think my opponent had a very micro-heavy build here. So when he committed his Lyrian Reaver Archers, he was thinking he could kind of move away, not bother paying too much attention to him, and let him kind of mess around with my Archers and pull back later. And instead he plowed straight into the Nasty Skulkers, and that cost him 2 units of Lyrian Reavers. The Silver Helms some of them did some pretty good work. Some got dragged into the muck rather quickly. Obviously, they're not a great cavalry unit, but they're a pretty decent one. They're very cheap. They cost the same as Orc Boy Big Guns, I do believe. And they're just cheap. That's really their main perk there. I think they're only 900 gold. So my opponent was able to bring a lot of them, but they just weren't able to break really the core of my army, which was constantly flexing Blob of Broken Tusk Mob and Wurzag. And Wurzag got some great work done with that Foot of Gork, just annihilating some troops, opening up the path for my Black Orcs to really kind of clean up a flank and collapse on the rest of my opponent's army. Definitely Black Orcs are a very difficult unit for High Elves to deal with, because they're immune to psychology. They have that monstrous weapon strength. They're really good against infantry, and they're rather hard to kill with the High Elf shooting, which doesn't have AP. Nonetheless, great game to my opponent. Mirror Archers here. I do hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe down below. If you have any comments, criticism, any questions, be sure to post them down in the comment section below, and I'll respond as soon as I can. As usual, guys, I do appreciate you for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye for now.